Was this an inevitable escalation? Over 3 days of fighting, more than 1,000 have died in Israel and Gaza. What's led to the most severe intensification of this conflict in decades? Will it draw in regional players, or could it serve to stop the Israeli occupation of Palestine? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is the Israel-Palestine war. Israel and Palestine have been trapped in a state of conflict for decades. But over the weekend, Israeli leaders say they witnessed their own 9/11. Hamas fighters stormed across the border from Gaza, attacking Israeli sites and killing hundreds. Israeli Defense Forces retaliated, bombing targets in Gaza, leaving hundreds of Palestinians dead. Now, since the creation of the State of Israel, it's been a seemingly endless cycle of violence. But could this incursion fundamentally change the dynamics? Could it prove an opportunity to end years of oppression? Or could we see a greater regional, even global conflict erupt? We'll debate that in a minute, but first, a look at how this shocking escalation unfolded.
By land, air, and sea. On Saturday, Hamas launched a violent assault on Israeli territory. More than 1,000 fighters crossed the heavily fortified border from Gaza, catching Israeli military and intelligence off guard. Fighters took control of towns in the south of Israel, near Gaza's border, killing and capturing hundreds. They opened fire at a music festival, killing more than 250 young attendees. Over the weekend, the armed group fired thousands of rockets, hitting 4 Israeli cities, including Tel Aviv, and killing hundreds of civilians. Hamas says it was a response to Israeli occupation and the repeated desecration of Al-Aqsa Mosque. In retaliation, Israeli strikes hit Hamas targets, residential buildings, and mosques in Gaza. It sent tanks and heavy vehicles to the border and called up 300,000 reservists in readiness for a ground invasion.
All the places in which Hamas is based, in this city of evil, all the places Hamas is hiding in, acting from, we will turn them into rebels.
Hundreds of Palestinians have been killed in 3 days of bombardment. The UN says more than 120,000 have been displaced. Human rights groups have long described Gaza as the world's largest open-air prison, with 2.2 million people living under Israeli blockade for years. Palestinians are not allowed to leave the Strip and their economic activity is limited. In response to Hamas' latest attacks, Israel has tightened its grip, imposing a full siege. Gaza's electricity, food, and fuel supplies have all been cut off.
We fled our houses there, they hid there, they strike everywhere. They do not recognize human beings nor stones or stores.
The US sent a carrier strike group closer to Israel after President Joe Biden affirmed his unwavering support to Netanyahu. The UN Security Council also met to discuss the situation but couldn't agree on a joint statement condemning Hamas after some members led by Russia demanded a broader focus. And the Palestinian ambassador to the UN called for an end to Israeli occupation.
This is a time to tell Israel it needs to change course. That there is a path to peace, where neither Palestinians nor Israelis are killed.
Lebanon's Hezbollah and Israel also exchanged retaliatory strikes on the weekend, and 6 Palestinians were killed in the occupied West Bank on Sunday. As the exchange of fire goes on, many fear the fighting could spread beyond Gaza, destabilizing the greater region.
Joining me now to debate what's brought us to this point and whether it can serve toward a resolution in this conflict are, from Ramallah, Mustafa Barghouti, Secretary General of the Palestinian National Initiative and member of the Palestinian Legislative Council. From Tel Aviv, Danny Ayalon is Israel's former Deputy Foreign Minister and former Israeli Ambassador to the United States. And from Washington, Dave Harden is the former USAID Assistant Administrator for the Bureau of Democracy, Conflict, and Humanitarian Assistance. He served in Gaza and the West Bank. Thanks all so much for being with me. Dave, I'll start with you. to try and get an observer's perspective. What are we witnessing here? I mean, some have said this is another detonation in the slow implosion of the apartheid state. What do you see happening?
I think we're witnessing a generational event. I think it's unpredictable and it's dangerous. And the events that happen in the next days and weeks will shape what happens over the decades ahead. I think it's extraordinarily dangerous.
Then I have to ask you, being in Washington, what you make of the somewhat hard line the United States is taking on this incident right now. It has just described it as an act of terror, really, and nothing else.
I mean, I don't think it's a hard line that the U.S. is taking. We have to begin with the Gaza disengagement of 2005 and then the ensuing PLC elections. We believed, and the Israelis believed, that that economic pressure and security pressure on Hamas would yield political change, and it never has. Hamas is just simply stronger than it ever has been, and I think that the challenges ahead of us are immense. This is not a hardline position from the United States by any means.
I mean, I don't want to go back too far, but when they say the Gaza disengagement, I mean, that was more or less a removal of settlers that were kind of illegal in the first place. So many Palestinians never really saw that as a disengagement as per an end to the occupation, which is the fundamental problem here. But let me come to Mustafa Barghouti, because your perspective is, of course, very interesting, because you are not a Hamas supporter, yet you seem to recognize that Palestinians cannot defend themselves against one of the world's most powerful militaries, and that all they have, in a sense, is Hamas as an armed defense against an armed occupier. Still, do you feel what's transpired over the weekend was in any way justified?
Well, what is not justified is to claim that Israel has the right to defend itself, but Palestinians are not allowed to defend themselves. At this very moment, Israel is conducting airstrikes on Gaza, which has taken the lives of 510 Palestinian civilians, including more than 100 children, including more than 70 women. And Netanyahu is declaring that his aim and goal is to continue this attack. And he says that he will conduct more and more massacres on Palestinians. The big question here is why we continue to have these repeated cycles of violence. Israel has attacked Gaza already 5 times, 5 wars on Gaza that took the lives of thousands of Palestinians. And Palestinians gave the world a peace agreement. They agreed on Oslo process, which was not really fair, but nevertheless, the world had 30 years to end this Israeli occupation. Instead of ending occupation, Netanyahu stood in the United Nations carrying a map of Israel, showing the annexation of the occupied West Bank, the annexation of the occupied East Jerusalem, and the annexation of Gaza Strip, which they claim they withdrew from. He also declared that he's going to annex the Golan Heights, which Israel already annexed legally. So we are talking here about a declaration that Israel has no intention of whatsoever to allow Palestinians to be free from occupation. On the contrary, where they've subjected us to a system of apartheid. This is the result of the Israeli policy. And the United States, instead of forcing Israel to stop settlement activities, to stop violation of international law, continued to support Israel. This is the main problem. You cannot ask people to accept a life of subjugation or a life of enslavement to another country. That's what Smotrich, the Israeli foreign finance minister, declared. He said, we will fill the West Bank with settlements and settlers so that Palestinians would lose any hope of a state of their own, and then they will have one of 3 options, either to immigrate or to accept a life of subjugation to the Israelis, or to die. No, sorry, we will not accept a life of subjugation to the Israelis, and we're not ready to leave our country. We already had one act of ethnic cleansing in 1948, and this should not be allowed to be repeated. We want to stay in our land. We want peace with everybody. We don't want any Israeli or Palestinian to be killed. But the road to that is to allow Palestinians to be free from this system of enslavement, apartheid, and oppression and occupation.
Let me ask you, though, I mean, specifically in the case of this attack, by attacking ordinary civilians, not settlers, not, the military itself. Many are arguing that Hamas has just proved Netanyahu's point that they simply want to destroy the state of Israel, and that no element of Hamas or any of the so-called militancy, as Israel puts it, or terrorism, as Israel puts it, can exist if Israel is to survive. Has Hamas, in this attack and how it was carried out, done a disservice to Palestinians?
Palestinians should not be, civilians should not be attacked, whether Israelis or Palestinians. And I hope that the world will be fair in this regard, not only to talk about Israeli civilians, but also talk about Palestinian civilians. No civilians should ever be attacked or should ever be killed. That's something I confirm and I always speak about. But the main question here is why this whole thing has happened. The main question here is why we are witnessing one cycle after another. And if Israel really cares about those who were, for instance, taken prisoners by Hamas, why don't they accept now the offer to exchange prisoners so that all these Israelis could come back safe to their homes and Palestinian prisoners would be released, including prisoners who have been in Israeli jails for 43 years? Why Israel is saying, I don't accept that? Why Netanyahu now is subjecting the lives of these Israeli prisoners to the possibility of being killed by his airstrikes? This is shocking. I think Netanyahu is the most opportunistic person in the world. This man cares only about himself. He knows that investigation committees in Israel will hold him responsible, and he is ready to kill all Palestinians and many Israelis just to survive as a prime minister and to evade being put in jail for his corruption.
Danny Ayalon, I will let you respond to that on behalf of Israel to the extent that you can. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, I would say to Mr. Barghouti that I would very much like to see freedom for the Palestinians. They deserve freedom. They deserve running their own without corruption like Arafat and his cronies did, without the terrorism of Hamas, which is an enemy of the Palestinian and of Mr. They are of Israel. And without the very extreme ideology of not ready to recognize Israel as the Jewish state and understanding history. We belong here, this is our place, and we are ready for mutual recognition. We have recognized the Palestinian right for self-determination. They can determine themselves as they want. Let them also allow us to accept and respect our self-determination. We are a Jewish state. This is number one. Secondly, I would have liked Barghouti and other leaders of the Palestinians to be more reasonable in their demands and accept a good deal. A very good deal for them was in 1936. Another good deal for them was at 1947 with the partition, which they refused. Why? Because they wanted everything. Another good deal was at Camp David in 2000.
Okay, so we know the history has accumulated, and both sides will make their historical cases in this argument. But I want to return, Danny Ayalon, with you to the attack of this weekend, because you seem to think that it is not organically driven, really, under the weight of oppression, but this is your angle, that it was taken more at the guidance by the hand of Iran and anger that Israel has been normalizing relations with Saudi and other partners. So as for this culmination that we've seen, explain your position there and why you don't think this is really the culmination of decades of oppression.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. Well, about oppression, you rightly mentioned, or I think it was Dave that mentioned, Dave Harden, that we left Gaza altogether in 2005, altogether, including, taking out all the civilians over there, handing it over to the authority to have their own state and place. What happened after 2005? There was elections where Hamas won. Actually, Hamas overthrew in a coup in 2007, overthrew the PA and turned Hamas and turned Gaza to a Hamas state with all the terror. Now, Hamas is not for peace. You don't have to take it from me. Just read their and their credo. Hamas says our aim is to destroy the Jewish state. Our aim is one Sharia Islamic state, there is no negotiation, no recognition, no compromise, no political process. This is it. Now they've proven it. Now, what was wrong for the last 10 years? Mr. Barghouti mentioned there were many rounds of violence. Every round of violence ended up with money, more money getting into the Hamas by the Qataris, more concessions from Israel.
That's not Hamas is not the issue. The issue is the Palestinian people who are under occupation.
Well, the occupation is because of your leadership. If you were to negotiate and accept a Palestinian state as was offered to you, I'm not going back to 36 and 48.
Do you support removing Israeli illegal settlements from all the occupied territories and ending Israeli occupation?
I'm not going to negotiate with you now, but I think this was pretty much what offered.
It's a legitimate question, though, because many argue that if illegal settlements, they have always been deemed illegal, had been stopped in the first place, had Israel abided by international law on that matter, so much of this conflict would not have materialized.
Andrea, if you talk about legality, let's go into interpretation. You know that the Balfour
he wants to keep
Declaration,
occupied territories.
So let me tell you, it's not occupied. In 2017, Balfour Declaration
We are not occupied.
Was
you are saying West Bank is not occupied, and you say that. Then what is it?
I'm saying,
is it Jewish land, and we are here like guests in the Jewish land? Is that what you are supporting? Supporting this extreme position?
Go back to the international positions. Have you heard of San Remo, of the League of Nations, which was succeeded by the United Nations? This was all a Palestinian mandate, an administrative unit governed by the British. The British, rightly so.
Again, I mean, we've had so many discussions about the history. As much as we can, I'd really like to try to look forward because, and Dave, let me bring up with you the question that I had put to Danny Ayalon, because the U.S. as well says that this attack was orchestrated because of the developments, particularly in Saudi-Israeli relations. I mean, how much was that a factor, in your opinion? Because if it is a serious factor, then there's no point in dealing with the history now. It is about the contemporary issues that are driving the militancy, as Israel would define it. And this is something that the United States, in particular, plays a huge role in.
So I think both things can be true, right? I mean, Hamas picked the time, place, and scope and tactics of this attack. And it was extraordinarily sophisticated. There were months of planning, and of course they had material and support, and the geographic context of the Abraham Accords and the discussions between Israel and Saudi all play a context here. But in addition, Israel has made a series of strategic mistakes, both in Gaza and in the West Bank, in terms of understanding and recognizing the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people. And so, we're in a really dangerous conundrum right now. There are no alternatives to Hamas in Gaza, and yet the Palestinian Authority is enfeebled and weak and not widely trusted among the Palestinians in the West Bank either. Very well may be the case that Hamas knew Israel would want to invade after this horrific attack, and that very well may be Hamas's plan. Hamas may want to bog Israeli soldiers down in Gaza and then kind of ignite the West Bank and pull in Hezbollah from the north. All of this is counterproductive to any kind of peaceful solution going forward. And let me reiterate something. The Palestinians have legitimate aspirations to national statehood, identity, and a future. They need to get what it is that they desire. Full stop. Which is a Palestinian state.
Go ahead, Mustafa Barghouti.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. But let me tell you that we gave the world 30 years of Oslo Agreement. And what did we see? Israeli governments stopped all forms of negotiations with Palestinians since 2014. Israeli government refuses even to sit with Mr. Abbas that they prefer to Hamas. Israeli government and the United States did not allow us to have our free democratic elections in 2021, which would have led to a new kind of political system where neither Hamas nor Fatah would have gotten a majority in a system which is fully proportional. But that was not allowed. And yet what we see now is more aggression on Palestinians and more attacks on people, and totally desperate and hopeless young people who find themselves obliged to go in the direction of violence because there is no alternative.
As for those people that are going...
Let me say one last thing. Your guest said that we refused 1947 deal of partition of Palestine. Fine. Israel also refused it. Avi Shlaim, a very well-known Israeli historian at Oxford University, did thorough research, and he found no document that shows that Israelis were ready to accept 1947. And suppose they accepted, why did they continue and occupied more than half of what should have become a Palestinian land? Why did they occupy why did they occupy the West Bank as well?
Right, so much of this goes back to the historic wrongs. But I need to ask you now...
But one last point. Yes,
but please answer this, because we're down to our last 3 minutes. Hamas right now has said it is on the verge of victory. But I need you to define that victory. Would it be a sense of somehow glory for Hamas, or is there a win in this for all Palestinians?
I don't know what they mean. I don't speak on their behalf, but I know one thing. I think they're trying to say to the world that we, the Palestinians, and I share that, will not accept a life of enslavement to a system of occupation, oppression, and apartheid. What they are saying to the world, that if you are supporting Ukraine with $224 billion because Ukraine is fighting occupation, why are you, in our case, supporting the occupier instead of supporting the people who are occupied, the Palestinians? This is the main question. The main basic question for Israelis and Americans and everybody. Are we, the Palestinians, equal human beings or not? Are we entitled to freedom like everybody else or not? Are we entitled to have our children also live in peace and securities like Israeli children? Or should it be only security for Israel, but no security for Palestinians? Calm for Israel and nothing for Palestinians. This doesn't work. It didn't work in South Africa during apartheid system. It didn't work in Algeria during the colonial French time. It didn't work in India. It will not work in Palestine. They kill Palestinians, there will be more Palestinians born, and they will insist on freedom. And the way to peace is easy. Israel's accepting the life, Palestinians' right to be free from occupation, accepting to end the system of apartheid, allowing us to be free in our own state, or let's live together in one democratic state if they want. We don't refuse that.
Danny Ayalon, you have said that this attack has given Israelis a sense of unity that has been lacking tremendously over the last year in the state of Israel. So what happens now?
Well, what happens now is that we're going to form a national unity government. Let me tell you, Netanyahu is not my cup of tea, but now when we are attacked, we're all together. Now, you asked, what does it mean? What does a Hamas victory mean? It means butchering children. I don't know if you saw the babies that they kidnapped, putting in cage, slaughtering people, women, and old women. This is what Hamas victory. But let's put this aside. I want to refer to Mr. Barghouti, who wouldn't even call me, in my name. He said, "You're a guest." And this is a microcosm of the problem of the Palestinians. I am for a Palestinian
I'm ready to call you by your name, Mr. Ayalon. No problem. I have no problem with that. I don't know why you misread me.
This is a good start. You can call me Danny. I'll be happy to call you Mustafa. And I am really happy. I am really happy for a Palestinian state, and with many of your terms. My only thing is, will you accept Israel determination as the Jewish state? That's all. Israel is the Jewish state, and when
didn't Palestinians listen? The official representative of Palestinians is the PLO, and PLO recognized Israel. Did Israel recognize a Palestinian state? No. That's the problem. You don't want us to be a state.
I'm happy to recognize the Palestinian as the Palestinian state. If you recognize us as the Jewish state, because what is the problem that we fear?
Then please convince Mr. Netanyahu that he shouldn't annex the West Bank and Gaza Strip. If you can manage to stop him from doing that, then we can have a road open to peace.
He's not going to. He's not going to do it. He has his.
And he is the prime minister.
He's not going to.
And he is the prime minister. Yes.
Okay,
Gentlemen. This is what he. This is what we had normally.
I wish we had been able to provide some answers as to where this is going, that there could be some kind of silver lining to this devastation that we're seeing right now, but we haven't gotten that far. I'm sure I will be speaking to all three of you in the days and months to come, because this doesn't look like an end will be in any soon sight. But I'd like to thank all three of you really so much for being with us, as always, on this edition of the Newsmakers, and our viewers, of course, for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on X, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.